The rain in Seattle doesn't just fall, it haunts. It clings to the glass of our high-rise apartment like a debt you can't pay off. I was standing in the kitchen, searing a pair of ribeyes for a celebration I thought we were sharing. Maya had been at Sterling and Vance for 6 years, grinding 18-hour days. I was the one who made sure there was coffee in the pot at 4 a.m. and a warm meal at midnight. I had watched her go from a nervous intern to a ruthless litigator, and I had been her silent engine every step of the way. I paid the utility bills when she was studying for the bar. I rubbed her shoulders when she lost her first big motion, and I believed in her when she didn't believe in herself. When the door clicked open that Tuesday, the air in the room shifted. It felt like a draft from a tomb. Maya didn't drop her keys with her usual exhausted sigh. She placed them on the marble counter with a clinical precision that made my stomach turn. "I made partner, Elias," she said. No smile, no hug, just a statement of fact, like she was reading a verdict. I turned, tongs in hand, ready to cheer, but the look on her face stopped me cold. She looked at our home, the home I had curated and maintained so she could focus on her career, as if it were a temporary campsite she was finally breaking. "The gala is this Friday at the Fairmont," she continued, her voice clipping like a court reporter's, "and I think it's best if you don't come. My parents are bringing Julian." Julian, her ex, the man who owned half of a venture capital firm and looked like he'd been carved out of old money. "Julian is a donor to the firm's PAC," Maya explained, avoiding my gaze as she poured a glass of vintage Bordeaux. "My parents think it's the right image for the partner announcement. You know how they are about optics, Elias. Please don't make this difficult." Before we go deeper into this story, take a second and hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and let us know where you're watching from. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel. Julian was the son of a federal judge, a man who moved through the world with the unearned confidence of someone who had never seen a past due notice. He and Maya had dated in college, a match made in old money heaven. When they broke up, her parents, Catherine and Arthur, treated it like a national tragedy. And when she started dating me, a guy from a blue-collar suburb in Ohio who taught high school history, they treated me like a persistent skin rash. They never missed an opportunity to mention Julian's latest acquisition or his philanthropic gala appearances. "You're asking me to stay home so your ex-boyfriend can pretend to be your partner?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The stakes were smoking behind me, charring into nothing, just like my sense of security. Maya didn't even look at the stove. She looked at her reflection in the darkened window, adjusting her hair. "It's one night, Elias. Julian is partner material in their eyes. You're a teacher? The firm wants power couples. They want prestige. Just let me have this win without making it a scene. It's about the career I've worked for. I'm not your ego." I realized then that she wasn't just asking for a favor. She was categorizing me. In her new world of billable hours and corporate takeovers, I was a liability. I was the startup boyfriend she was ready to trade in now that she'd hit the IPO. The betrayal wasn't just in the uninvitation, it was the way she spoke about me like I was a piece of furniture that didn't match the new renovation. I was being rebranded out of my own life. To understand why Maya would do this, you have to understand her parents. Catherine and Arthur lived on a sprawling estate on Mercer Island, a place where the lawns are manicured with scissors and the secrets are buried under layers of French limestone. I remembered a dinner there 2 years ago. So Arthur had spent 40 minutes talking about his vintage Porsche collection before turning to me and asking, "So, Elias, do you ever feel limited, teaching the same dates and names to teenagers who don't care about anything but their phones? It must be hard seeing people like Julian move the needle of history while you just narrate it." Maya hadn't said a word. She'd just sipped her wine and looked at the lake. That was the day I realized I wasn't just competing with Julian. I was competing with an idea of success that I would never fit. I had spent 7 years building a foundation for her. I was the one who researched the Pacific Northwest legal history to help her with her first major brief. I was the one who managed the household so she could build 2,500 hours a year. I thought I was building a life. I was actually just building a ladder for her to climb over me. The Mercer Island influence had finally won. She didn't want a partner, she wanted a prop. The days following the uninvitation weren't filled with explosive arguments. They were filled with something much worse, the sound of a man being erased from his own life. I spent those afternoons walking through our apartment, realizing that Maya had already started the decluttering process. My framed degrees, simple but hard-earned, were moved from the hallway to the back of the closet. My collection of vintage maps, which I had spent years collecting, had been replaced by a sleek, sterile piece of abstract art that Julian had recommended for the partner look. I watched her through the doorway of her home office. She was always on the phone with Julian, her voice dropping into a low, intimate register that she used to reserve only for me. They weren't just talking about the firm, they were talking about their future, a future where I didn't exist. I felt like a tenant who had overstayed his lease, even though I was the one who had paid the security deposit in the first 6 months of rent when she was an unpaid intern. I was being phased out with the cold efficiency of a corporate restructuring. But while she was busy editing me out, I was busy reading the fine print of the life she was trying to build with her new partner. Before we continue, take a second and share your thoughts so far on this story below. I read every single one. If you found out your partner was using their career to hide a former flame's dirty laundry, would you walk away quietly or burn it all down? I knew the password to her backup drive because it was the date of our first anniversary. She hadn't bothered to change it. While she was out for celebratory drinks with Julian and her parents at some exclusive club in Bellevue, I sat in the dark, the blue light of the monitor reflecting off my glasses. I wasn't just looking for an affair. I was looking for the reason why Julian was so vital to her promotion. Julian wasn't a lawyer. He was a shark, and sharks don't give away donations to law firms without expecting blood in the water. That's when I found the Project Phoenix folders. It was a sophisticated shell game. Julian's venture capital firm, Aegis North, was funneling capital through Sterling and Vance to acquire distressed real estate across the country. But the numbers didn't add up. The purchase prices were inflated by 40%, and the legal fees being paid to Maya's firm were essentially kickbacks. It was money laundering, plain and simple, dressed up in the fine silk of corporate litigation. And Maya? My Maya was the one who had signed off on the compliance paperwork. She had traded her ethics for a title, and Julian was the one holding the leash. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I simply breathed. I'm a history teacher. My entire career is built on the understanding that the greatest victories aren't won on the battlefield, but in the archives. I began to mirror Maya's coldness. I became the perfect supportive ghost. I made her coffee, I folded her laundry, and I listened to her talk about the legacy she was building. Every time she spoke, I felt a little more of the man I used to be slip away, and replaced by a version of myself that was as calculating as she was. I spent my nights in the back corner of a public library, away from any cameras or home Wi-Fi trails. I began drafting the history lesson. I created a timeline, not of the Revolutionary War, but of Maya's signatures. Every document she had signed for Aegis North was cross-referenced with Julian's bank transfers. I knew that Maya wasn't a criminal at heart. She was just desperate for a seat at the table. But in the eyes of the law, desperation isn't a defense. By signing those papers, she had tied her fate to Julian's. If he went down, she went with him. The morning of the gala, the atmosphere in the apartment was suffocating. Maya was manic, checking her reflection every 5 minutes, practicing her partner speech in the mirror. I sat at the table, one eating a bowl of cereal, watching the woman I had loved for 7 years vanish before my eyes. She was wearing the emerald silk dress her parents had bought her, the color of envy and money. "You're being very quiet today," she said, pausing to check her teeth for lipstick. "Just thinking about history, Maya," I replied. "How most great empires don't fall because of an invasion. They fall from within. A little bit of rot at the foundation, and eventually the whole thing just slides into the sea." She laughed, a sharp, nervous sound. "Always the teacher, Elias. Try to be happy for me, okay? This is the start of a new life for us." "Oh, I know," I said, a cold smile touching my lips. "It's definitely the start of something." I watched her walk out the door to meet the town car Julian had sent. She didn't look back. She didn't see me pick up the phone and call Marcus, my former student at the IRS. The lesson is ready, Marcus, I told him. Check your inbox. When I arrived at the Fairmont, I didn't go to the main entrance. I went to the loading dock. I knew the service elevator code from a part-time job I'd held in college. I slipped into the kitchen, snagging a glass of champagne from a passing tray. I stood in the shadows of the velvet curtains, watching the elite of Seattle congratulate themselves on their own brilliance. The room was a sea of tuxedos and diamonds, but to me, it looked like a sinking ship. I saw Julian lean in and whisper something in Maya's ear. She laughed and touched his chest. It was a gesture of ownership. Her parents stood nearby, holding court. Hannah telling everyone who would listen about their brilliant daughter and her brilliant partner. They had already replaced me in the narrative. To them, the last 7 years were just a clerical error that had finally been corrected. They didn't see the history teacher standing by the curtains waiting for the bell to ring. The Fairmont's ballroom was a cathedral of vanity. Every clink of a crystal flute sounded like a cash register. I stayed in the periphery, leaning against a marble pillar, watching the family secrets and revenge play out in real time. Maya was radiant in her emerald silk, but to me she looked like she was wearing a shroud. Julian stood beside her, his hand never leaving her back, a claim of territory. Her parents, Catherine and Arthur, moved through the crowd like royalty, accepting congratulations for a success they had bought with someone else's labor. I checked my watch. 8:15 p.m. In 15 minutes, Marcus would be sending the final encrypted file to the head of the Washington State Bar Association and the regional IRS Criminal Investigation Division. I wasn't just ruining a party, I was decommissioning an entire machine of corruption. I took a deep breath, the scent of expensive lilies and floor wax filling my lungs, and began my walk toward the head table. I felt lighter than I had in years. I wasn't the limited teacher anymore. I was the one about to grade the final exam. As I approached, Arthur saw me first. His eyes narrowed, his posture stiffening like a dog guarding a bone. He leaned over to whisper to a security guard, but I was already within earshot of the main table. The senior partner, L. Henderson, was just finishing a story about a landmark settlement that had put the firm on the map. Elias? Maya's voice was a jagged shard of glass. The champagne glass in her hand trembled. She looked at Julian, then at her father, her eyes pleading for someone to make me disappear before the image was tarnished. "Don't stop on my account," I said, my voice carrying just enough to turn the heads of the surrounding tables. I wouldn't miss the Partner of the Year celebration. After all, I'm the one who stayed up until 3 a.m. helping you draft the very compliance memos that got you this promotion. I feel like I own at least a small percentage of that title. Don't you think, Julian? Julian stepped forward, his face a mask of practiced condescension. "Elias, this isn't the time or the place. You're clearly emotional. Why don't we get you a car and talk about this like adults tomorrow? You're making a scene in front of people who actually matter." "We aren't talking tomorrow, Julian," I said, pulling a small, heavy envelope from my jacket pocket and placing it on the white linen tablecloth. "Because tomorrow you're going to be very busy with the federal auditors. And Maya? She'll be busy explaining to the bar why her signature is on the Aegis North Shell Company transfers. I think the adults are already waiting for you downstairs." The word Aegis hit the table like a grenade. Julian's smug expression vanished, replaced by a gray, sickly pallor. Henderson, the senior partner, set his glass down so hard the stem snapped. The room, which had been a roar of conversation, began to sink into an uncomfortable, heavy silence. People at the neighboring tables began to lean in, their curiosity outweighing their politeness. "I don't know what you're talking about," Maya hissed, though her hands were shaking so violently she had to set her clutch down. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for an exit that didn't exist. "I think you do," I said, stepping closer, my voice calm and steady. "I spent 7 years being your ghostwriter, Maya. I know your style, I know your logic, and I know that you knew exactly what Julian was doing. You didn't do it because you're evil. You did it because you were afraid of being just a teacher's wife in your father's eyes. You traded your soul for a seat at a table that was already rotting. And look at you now. You're the partner in a firm that won't exist by Monday. If you were in my shoes facing a situation like this, what would you do? Share your thoughts in the comments. Would you keep the secret to save the person you loved? Or would you expose the truth to save your own soul? Arthur finally lost his composure. He lunged toward me, grabbing my lapel, his breath smelling of expensive scotch and desperation. "You're a nobody. You're a pathetic history teacher who couldn't provide for my daughter. You think you can walk in here and ruin her life? Do you have any idea who I am?" I didn't flinch. I looked at him with the calm of a man who has already seen how the story ends. "I'm not ruining her life, Arthur. I'm just providing the bibliography. The history has already been written. You and Catherine wanted a power couple. Well, you got one. One that's going to be featured in the legal section of every newspaper in the Pacific Northwest. You wanted prestige, but all you bought was a front row seat to an indictment." I pulled my lapel from his grip and turned to the room, where hundreds of eyes were now fixed on the head table. "Enjoy the lobster, everyone. It's likely the last thing this firm will be able to afford for a while. The IRS tends to be very thorough when they find $1 billion laundromat." I walked out of that ballroom with my head held high. Behind me, I could hear the panicked murmurs turning into a roar of questions. Maya called my name once, a desperate, broken sound that carried all the way to the elevators. But I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I walked through the lobby, past the statues and the gold leaf trim, and out into the cool Seattle rain. I got into my car and drove. I didn't go back to our apartment. I had already left my key on the kitchen island, right next to the cold, charred steaks from a week ago. I drove until the city lights were a blur in my rearview mirror, heading east toward the mountains. For the first time in 7 years, I didn't have a schedule to keep, a brief to proofread, or a partner to carry. I was just Elias. And for the first time, that was enough. A month later, I was sitting in a small cabin in the Cascades. The news reports had been relentless. Sterling and Vance had filed for bankruptcy after a mass exodus of clients. Julian's father, the federal judge, had retired early to avoid the splash damage of his son's racketeering indictment. And Maya? Her license was suspended. She hadn't been charged with a felony yet, but her career was over. She was radioactive in the legal world. She had tried to call me from a dozen different numbers. I never answered. There was nothing left to say. She had chosen her path, and I had simply paved the exit. I spend my days now teaching history at a small community college. The pay is less, but the air is cleaner. I learned that you can't force someone to value you. You can build their throne, but if they don't have the character to stand on it, they will always fall. And when they do, you don't have to be the one to catch them. Thank you for watching this journey on family secrets and revenge. This story is a reminder that the strongest thing you can ever be is yourself, and the most dangerous thing you can ever do is betray the person who knows your heart. If you found this story powerful, please hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and share it with someone who believes in justice. What part of Elias's journey resonated with you the most? Tell me in the comments and share your overall thoughts based on my story. I'm curious to know, how far would you go to reclaim your dignity? See you in the next story.